Call the meeting to order of Tuesday, October 15th. If you are able to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent prayer. If you remain standing for a moment of silence. The first item on the agenda is a consent agenda for the minutes of the October 1st, 2024 regular meeting, statements and checks, and the treasurer's report.
So moved.
Support.
Motion Eldridge, support Rowe. Questions or comment? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is the attorney. Is there any general legal update? Mr. Winters?
Madam Chair, there's no general legal update this evening, but I've been torn on this one issue, but I did see Lieutenant Teets in the audience. I do want to at least express the board's appreciation to the Sheriff's Department. I know the detective involved in the case, and in regards to an incident that happened here at the Township where we had a person who had been convicted of a very serious felony that was lurking around our maintenance building, and the person had been convicted of a criminal sexual conduct case many years ago, well, not many years ago, 12 years ago, and was supposed to have been on a tether. I came into contact with one of our employees, and that's where the police were able to apprehend this individual and charge him of 4 separate felonies. I did advise the board of the felony charges that were filed against this individual, but perhaps more importantly, I think the township officials and HR has really encouraged all of our employees that when something does not look right or doesn't feel right, to not go any further, to immediately contact 911, call the Sheriff's Department. And as exemplified in this case here, the response was extremely quick, professional, and has resulted in this person being taken into custody. Supervisor Stumble and myself did attend the arraignment of this individual last week, and we intend to also be present for the probable cause hearing scheduled for this coming Thursday. But just a reminder right now that we always have to emphasize not only to our neighborhood watch groups, but to our own family of employees here, and they are a family to all of you, to all of us, that we just have to be very, very vigilant and very, very protective. And again, give a tremendous amount of thanks and respect to the Lieutenant Chad Teets and his team of detectives and other deputies who responded extremely quickly to bring this individual or take this individual into custody that very morning. And again, it's not to prolong this kind of report, but just to at least make notice of the fact that we are monitoring this ongoing court case, and that we will continue to be there for our employees, so whenever incidents of this nature arise. But again, thanks to Lieutenant Teets and his staff for an excellent job of taking this individual into custody.
Questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Winter. Hearing none, under new business, we have the first reading of Resolution 2024-14, which is the proposed ordinance 2024-509, an amendment to Chapter 62, Section 106-229 of the Code of Ordinances, Charter Township of Ypsilanti, Municipal Sewer Use and Industrial Waste Pretreatment Ordinance.
So moved.
Clerk Rowe. I think we
All
have
right,
to
yep.
read it.
I have Resolution 2024-14, a resolution to adopt a revised sewer use ordinance, whereas the Charter Township of Ypsilanti Municipal Sewer Use and Industrial Waste Pretreatment Ordinance, hereinafter Sewer Use Ordinance, Chapter 62, Sections 106 through Section 229, was last revised in 2010, and whereas the Sewer Use Ordinance implements the provisions of the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972 and all federal regulations adopted thereunder, and the Michigan Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act and all regulations adopted thereunder, and is a local environmental protection ordinance that is required by these federal and state statutes and regulations. And whereas the sewer use ordinance contains provisions relating to, among other things, sewer use and construction of the local limits on the concentration of certain pollutants in wastewater discharged to the Township Sewage Works and the Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority, YCUA, wastewater treatment plant designated to protect the integrity and operation of that wastewater treatment plant, and empowers the township through YCUA to enforce these clean water environmental provisions. And whereas the local enforcement authority is required by both federal and state law and includes the authority to require businesses and industries that discharge certain pollutants to self-monitor themselves and to report to YCUA, and also permits YCU to sample and test wastewater discharge and to make on-site inspections and to take enforcement action against violators as required by federal and state law. And whereas the sewer use ordinance and federal regulations require periodic review of limits placed on the concentration of certain pollutants in wastewater discharged to Yucca, and whereas substantial revisions to the sewer use ordinance are necessary due to the establishment and implementation of local limits for certain substances. And whereas Ordinance 2024-14, hereinafter referred to as the ordinance, revises and expands the scope of the sewer use ordinance to, among other things, include a new section, Section 62-1818, for mitigating substances and implementation of best management practices for the control of PFAS, which are a group of pollutants emerging concern for YCUA and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And whereas the ordinance includes the special alternative limits for certain compatible pollutants that will allow YCUA to better accommodate industrial and commercial needs in the community by allocating available capacity of certain compatible pollutants directly to permitted discharges, and whereas the ordinance contains revisions to existing limits and language primarily to improve clarity and adopt compatible pollutant limits to allow better implementation of special alternative limits program. And whereas the ordinance includes revision to existing limits for certain toxic pollutants of concern, including the inclusion of instantaneous limits for available substances and reduction in existing maximum allowable limits for arsenic, nickel, and silver. And whereas the ordinance removes proclamation dates associated with applicable regulations and deletes from time to time in reference from any amendments thereof, and it is sufficient to state, for example, 40 CFR Part 136 as amended. The ordinance also streamlines certain definitions pertaining to the wastewater discharge permits for industries and clarifies language regarding the fats, oil, and grease mitigation program policy. And whereas the applicable state regulations require definitions of certain terms used in the sewer use ordinance to meet current standards on emerging contaminants and sample testing, and to properly identify possible sources of pollution and to more accurately define pretreatment requirements and similar provisions, all of which are incorporated into the ordinance. And whereas the ordinance improves and brings into regulatory compliance the self-monitoring and other reporting requirements for non-domestic users of the Township Sewage Works and YCUA system and wastewater treatment plant, and the procedures to be engaged in by these users in sampling, testing, and reporting to YCUA. And whereas the ordinance contains a new section, Section 62-1819, for implementation of a local initiative limit, which provides another tool that can be used by YCUA staff to regulate a previously unevaluated pollutant. Now therefore be resolved that Ordinance 2024-509, which is attached here too, which modifies Section 62 through 106 through 62 through 229 of the Code of Ordinance, is adopted in its entirety. I would so move the first reading of the ordinance.
Support.
We have a motion by Rose, support by Peterson. Mr. Blackburn?
Thank you, Clerk Rowe. So good evening, Supervisors and board members of the board. Before I get started, I'd also like to welcome Sridhar Mullapudi. He is YCA's Director of Operations Compliance at the plant, and definitely our in-house subject matter expert on the sewer use ordinance and these revisions. I will go over a summary of these revisions. Essentially, think of the sewer use ordinance as the tool that YCA used that contains the do's and don'ts for the collection system or the sewers, and then also the wastewater treatment plant to ensure that it's operated properly, that there's no what we call pass-through or interference in that system, whether that be blockage in the sewer or whether that be some type of upset at the treatment plant, inhibiting the reuse of the biosolids that we use at the plant. Pass-through would be anything that would affect the water quality that leaves the plant. This is the tool that we use to control the discharges coming into the system to ensure that those bars are met. YCA last updated the sewer use ordinance in 2010. There's many reasons why we're proposing to update the current sewer use ordinance. One of the primary drivers for updating the ordinance is a new program for allocating pollutant levels that we basically set limits in the ordinance for. The current methodology is what we call uniform allocation. It's essentially we give everybody the same piece of pie. The same type of pie would be the best way I would explain it in simple terms. The new way allows us to differentiate and give different pieces of pie to different users depending on the characteristics of their discharge. It is a more efficient and the most business-friendly way to allocate pollutant loadings. And when I say pollutants, I mean pollutants that the treatment plant is designed for, not toxic pollutants, but general pollutants such as ammonia or phosphorus. These are things that the treatment plant is designed for. There's no change in the way the allocation is done. There is no change in what we're actually receiving into the treatment plant. It's just how we allocate it to those industrial users. And this is primarily who these allocations impact. It is not residential users or septic users or any of those type of discharges. This is really just for industrial users such as platers and different industries that receive permits from the authority. Another major driver for the revision is an update and introduction for PFAS compounds, perfluoro and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are a group of emerging contaminants that in the news we hear a lot about today, whether it's materials on Teflon, waterproofing and so forth, packaging. These are compounds that are becoming of concern due to their disruption in the environment and their impact on the environment. So back in 2018, YCA began to receive notifications from the state of Michigan, Eagle, to begin investigating the sources of these compounds. Through multiple years now, about 6 years after this, some of these investigations and work has been done. We're at the point where we are incorporating what we call local limits or limits for 4 of those compounds. And those are included in the revised sewer use ordinance. Other changes in the ordinance are revisions to what we call toxic pollutants. So these are the metals and different specific organic compounds. Most of these revisions are driven by sampling studies that we do at the plant that we have to perform under our permit every few years, and it necessitates changes in when we see how pollutants are removed through the plant and or if the water body that we discharge to has changed. The state of Michigan has adopted a new limit that therefore requires a lower limit coming into the beginning of the plant. So there's different factors that necessitate why these limits have to change. Toxic pollutants are not part of any of these special allocations. These limits are the same limits that apply to every industrial user regardless of the business activity that they perform. Some of those include the introduction of available cyanide, a reintroduction of bis-2 ethohexylthiolate, which actually used to be in the ordinance prior to 2010. It was taken out. Reduction in the level of arsenic in the sewer use ordinance, reduction in nickel, reduction in silver, just to summarize a few. Other changes in the ordinance is the proposal of what we call a local initiative limit. This is a regulatory tool that the authority would like to adopt in the ordinance, that if there is a new pollutant that the authority would be faced with, that we have to more on the fly develop some limits that we would have to enact with an industry because we have not went through a full-blown study to adopt it in their sewer use ordinance. It would allow us to do some preliminary work and have a limit that then a user would have to adhere to. It was a recommendation by one of our consultants, and this comes up sometimes if we have a new industry come into the service area and they introduce a pollutant that the authority has not previously studied. Other general changes to the ordinance are general housekeeping items, regulatory language and so forth, clarifications on existing language. The sewer use ordinance recently was approved by Eagle. They've reviewed the ordinance multiple times through different iterations, whether it was for compatible pollutants or toxic pollutants. It recently just finished a 30-day public comment period. There were no public comments received on the ordinance, therefore the state of Michigan approved it. And that is a general summary of most of the changes, not every single one, but I welcome any questions or comments.
That's a lot to absorb. We did have a preliminary meeting to kind of try to understand, because a lot of this is just terms that we don't use every day, but it's our sewer use ordinance, and it primarily pertains to industrial users. Is that
Correct.
That is correct? Okay.
Yes.
And I knew it was out for review with Eagle, and so the state of Michigan has approved the proposed ordinance.
The state of Michigan has approved it a couple times. Correct. It's currently approved by the state of Michigan. It has went through many legal reviews of YCUA's own legal counsel. It's been reviewed by our external subject matter expert on ordinances and industrial pretreatment program type of activities. So it is went through many different eyes for review prior to coming to the township today.
I'm just wondering, though, did the state of Michigan approve the proposed ordinance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? I do have a couple, but this is a first reading, and we'll be able to get in depth more. And the last time it was revised in 2010, correct?
Correct.
So it's been a while since the ordinance revisions have occurred.
Correct. And what the authority typically does, most of this work actually began back in 2016 because it's quite a process to go through the ordinance and then get it adopted not only by the city and township, but also by all of our contract communities. The township sets what we call the model ordinance, so that every other community has to adopt the same ordinance or an ordinance that is more stringent. So a community could decide to be more stringent, but they could not decide to be less stringent with the ordinance. So those are agreements that we sign with those communities that require them to adopt these types of provisions for the PFAS compounds, for changes in arsenic or different allocations. They have to adopt the same language and requirements.
You talked about prohibited connections, which is where the storm,
Yes.
I think, is that important? Is that a change?
There's no major changes in prohibited connections in regards to stormwater. That's still considered a prohibited connection.
Yes.
Because you have it listed in your,
I think what there's clarifications on is the
change.
approval, if there was some type of approval, would come from the YCUA director and not from one of our, say, contract communities.
because I know, like in West Willow, they have the down spouts connected to the sanitary sewer.
Correct.
And so we're trying to find different ways to remove that and disconnect it so you don't back up into the.
Correct.
Into the house.
Those have been grandfathered in. The authority would not go back unless it was part of a major grant type of project or something
is
to work
what we're-
with the community. But there's no changes in the sewer use ordinance language that would require homeowners on their own dollar to change those connections.
But no new, like a new
Absolutely.
subdivision would
Correct.
never be allowed to do it.
Correct.
Okay. And the surcharges, the new surcharge, could you elaborate on that just a little bit more?
So the surcharges are for
I know, yeah, but are there new ones?
There's not new, call it parameters or pollutants. It's the same ones that the plant's designed to treat for. We're changing the levels a little bit. For example, ammonia used to be set at 700 milligrams per liter, and there's just very little usage. Again, I would compare it to like you give everybody the same piece of pie, yet they don't need that type of pie. They want a different piece. So you're over allocating because you're uniformly giving the same thing to everybody. So the new program, what it does is it ratchets down that limit. And then if a user that we approve with a special agreement needs that additional capacity, we then have it essentially on the shelf that we can pull off and issue to them. It doesn't mean that we're going to give it all to them or some, and there's going to be a lot of constraints within those agreements that gives YSU authority to pull back if something were to change.
Just on number 3 on your memo, said this would clarify the legal authority which allows Yucca to require self-monitoring and to collect surcharge revenues from such facilities that do not meet the definition of a significant industrial user. And is that a change?
So that is a clarification. We collect those revenue dollars now, but there's probably, I would call it a gray area. So we do have some, I would say, industrial users that do not specifically have a permit with YCUA, but they have some compatible pollutants, whether it be phosphorus, ammonia, solids, those type of compatible pollutants. And we've seen where their discharge is elevated, but there's different criteria when YCUA issues a permit to a facility. It brings in a lot of requirements that YCUA and the industry has to do. So we don't issue permits to every facility just because they exceed a limit sometimes.
So if they're not a significant industrial user,
We could still collect revenue. Sorry.
and you're doing that currently.
Correct.
So that's
It's a
not
clarification of the existing language, but we do the practice.
Okay. And what I do understand and do like is that you're having a new section for the mitigation of PFAS.
Correct.
And so that's good news. I can understand that sentence very well, so. Again, this is first reading. I know the attorney has been going through it, so I'm sure by second reading he'll even,
More questions? Good.
yeah. Yes, trustee Swenson?
So I think you explained the pie one, if I'm understanding it right, with the pie being split in different parts. If a user needed a change in the pie, is that updating depending on what's needed? So you said everybody kind of across the board had the same pie before. Let's say now somebody doesn't need it, but then later they need a different part of the pie. Is that moving all the time to accommodate for what they need, or how does that work?
YCA will retain, the total amount of pie doesn't change. So if there is capacity on the shelf and we think that it's available to that industry that's requesting the change, then of course we would consider it and potentially approve that allocation with that industry. We may go back and renegotiate with another industry if they're not using that capacity. We have not worked out all the specific details of how these allocations will be done. This sets the ability to even do it. But that's kind of how it would work, is the total amount would not change unless the plant changed. And we would develop these agreements with these industries specific on what they need.
And that could change. It's not locked in, I guess. It could change depending on,
We plan to put a lot of, I would say, legal teeth into these agreements that for any reason, if YSUA decides to revoke it, that we would reserve that right.
Okay. And then, you said Eagle reviewed it.
Correct.
Our recent experiences with Eagle have made me a little skeptical of Eagle. So help me understand who else is looking over this other than Eagle, because at this point, recently, there have been a lot of things that have happened where Eagle's been much more lenient than what we hoped they would do. So if that is our boundary or our, that doesn't make me feel as comfortable given what's happened recently with stormwater runoff, with them coming out and us needing help with investigating things. They've been kind of like, meh, and that isn't helpful when you're talking about this kind of stuff.
It's a great question. I would say YSUA takes the initiative with the help from our consultant. Shri leads this effort, and Shri is an expert in this field. And through working with our legal counsel, who have worked through many different use ordinances and regulatory matters at the plant, what we propose to Eagle is what we think is acceptable to protect our system. I agree that their approval is not the marker that indicates everything will be perfect. It's just another stamp of acceptance.
Which may be something that comes back for a little information when it's the second reading. So ordinances are great, but it's always enforcement that's going to help with an ordinance. So it'd be helpful to understand how we look at that part and who is our enforcement agency should someone violate our ordinance once this is passed. So that doesn't have to be answered tonight, but I think before the second reading, I would really like to know more about what happens when we have someone who's violating the ordinance.
So hopefully I have the right answer for that. So YSUA is required by the state of Michigan under our permit to have an industrial pretreatment program. One component of that program is what we call an enforcement response plan. So YSUA has a very specific process flow driven approach to whenever somebody would exceed a phosphorus limit, when somebody would not self-monitor, when somebody would do an inappropriate connection. It's not arbitrary. It is a specific plan that we follow that's been also approved by the state. That's not adjusting. We're not proposing any adjustments to that plan, but it is available, and it gives us some wiggle room, so to speak, to navigate certain environments if there is something that is adversely affecting the treatment plant or inhibiting water quality. YSUA can issue what we call a cease and desist. So we have Shri and his team, along with legal counsel, we routinely issue written violations. We routinely inspect facilities, hold administrative consent hearings, issue consent orders. These are very common practices for the industrial pretreatment staff.
A question.
Trustee Newman?
In the example of where you mentioned the pie, for instance, now that pie would be...
Speak into the microphone.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That pie would be to give, say, for instance, the treatment to the various places that you have or have designated. So in the event that they all need treatment and it exceeds, has there been an example of where they all would exceed the limits that you've set? And if so, what measures are in place to handle that?
It is very common for various industries. On a routine basis, they violate the numerical limits for phosphorus, solids, metals, different parameters. There is so many safety factors built into this total calculation that not in my 20-plus year career, and I'm sure in Shri's, has everybody discharged over the levels. And at that point, it wouldn't matter what the level is because they've all done it anyways. They've went over the limits. It's never been an issue.
Thank you.
All right, so this is first reading, and it's an ordinance, so we have to do a roll call vote. We have a motion and support, so the motion was to approve the first reading of the resolution. Swanson,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Rowe,
Yes.
Stumbo votes yes, Eldred, and Hunter.
Yes.
The first reading is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very long number 2 item. Request authorization to renew. Request authorization for the renewal of the Recovery Court Grant contracts. Specifically, the Michigan Drug Court Grant Program, which is MDCGP grant, and to accept the grant funds in the amount of $3,000 budgeted in line item 236-000-540000 and expenditure in a corresponding amount in the budget. And the Office of Highway Safety Program grant, and to accept the grant funds in the amount of $87,000 budgeted in line item 236-000-542000 and expenditure in a corresponding amount in our budget.
So move.
Motion by Rowe, support by Swanson. Hi. Good evening. Magistrate?
Is it green? Let's try that now. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Magistrate and Court Administrator Hillary Braley, and I am requesting that the board renew our Recovery Court grant contracts. We have been awarded, and I did attach copies of the award letters, the same total amount that we actually received for the last fiscal year. The Recovery Court grant fiscal years run from October 1st to September 30th. So our most recent fiscal year for the grant just ended the end of last month. The $90,000 is the same figure that we received for that last fiscal year. It is allocated somewhat differently between the two grants. We've got $3,000 going to the MDCGP grant and $87,000 to the OHSP grant. I'm happy to take questions. I'm not entirely sure what kind of questions you
And
would
what
like.
do the grants fund?
So specifically, it's the 14B District Court Recovery Court that has been in existence since, I believe, about 2015. It was established with the local administrative order when Charles Pope was still the judge. So it's a recovery court program where we accept, we'll say, defendants into a probationary program that's a bit more strenuous than your average probationary program. They start out in a phase 1 of the program where they're actually coming into court every 2 weeks in person to meet with the judge. It's a slightly less formal court setting than normal, generally. We're not calling cases officially, we're generally checking in with people, and the purpose of this is to support them in their recovery journey. It's generally people who have nonviolent offenses. Many of them, it's for driving under the influence of some sort of substance, be it alcohol or some other controlled substance. And we support them with, like I said, strenuous probation check-ins, very frequent drug screenings. They get various sorts of counseling and therapy services with our various community supports. We're partnered with Dawn Farm and Home of New Vision and a number of other agencies, including the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office with Community Corrections. So we have a successful program. We actually recently graduated 5 participants successfully from the program, so they were discharged successfully from probation. And I can say personally, just having been involved with it over a year, it's incredible to see the difference with some of the people who come in with horrible problems that have been going on for decades. And the point of this is to really cut down on recidivism and just assist people with putting their lives back together. So,
All right, thank you. Are there questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Treasurer Eldridge.
Magistrate Braley, just so that everyone is clear, does this support residents in need from throughout Washtenaw County or just Ypsilanti Township?
so it is throughout Washtenaw County, but largely it's Ypsilanti Township. So I believe they have to be a resident of Ypsilanti Township, but their case might have originated from another Washtenaw County court, and they have been referred into our program. So.
Any other questions or comments? Trustee Swanson?
Does the grant fully fund the program, or are the costs higher than what the grant funds?
No, the grant fully funds the court program.
And there's only one question on your memo. It says that it may be necessary to make adjustments to the budget at the end of 2024. Did you mean 2025 or did you mean 2024?
So because the fiscal years don't line up, and I will admit that I may have used Magistrate Nelson's, I cribbed some of his notes from prior memos. So what I was referring to was because the fiscal years don't line up.
Right.
We
Okay.
may just be requesting to, adjust some things between the township fiscal year ending and the new township fiscal year.
Okay.
One question, Madam Chair.
Trustee Peterson?
Just reading down, I think, from that, it says, additionally, SCAO will continue considering requests for grants reallocation throughout the fiscal year. So if you somewhat reach your budget in the middle of that fiscal year, you can apply for more money.
Yes. Yes.
Based on what?
So.
Based on, did you spend the whole allocation and need extra money, and what would that other part be?
So it can work a couple ways. With the way that the State Court Administrative Office is looking at it, we are reporting once a quarter as to what we've spent already and what we anticipate spending in the future. If I anticipate needing something, then I can do what they call a contract amendment to request another reallocation to us for more money. I actually did that this past fiscal year. We didn't have a specific line item for supplies that we might need for the recovery court. So I did a reallocation request to specifically request an addition for supplies. Did that answer your question?
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna
Okay.
say one more thing.
Okay.
Well, I guess, and then, so, is it that you're getting 90,000 for that fiscal year?
Yes.
So what, if you ask for additional funds, on what percentage would they consider it? Would they give you 4% or what?
Okay.
Extra,
So,
40% extra to help you with the fiscal year?
so my.
Like when you applied,
Yes.
did you say a certain amount?
So what I specifically did this past time was I needed $200 extra dollars for supplies. So I specifically requested $200. In the future, they haven't specifically said that it would go off of a percentage. What they like to see with their requests is very detailed, here's how much money I think I'm going to need, and here's why. And with SCAO, what they're going to then do is see, first off, who else in the state is using or not using all of their grant money, and then what they have available from their own federal award to say, yes, we can give this to you, or no, we can only give you part. But I don't have a good answer as far as like, no, they don't cap it at like 4%, like your example.
I got it, just
Okay.
specific what you need, and
Yes.
they will send you a response.
Yes.
Even if it comes from another budget that they didn't spend their money, another area.
So my understanding is that they have certain federal awards that they'd be pulling from their own OHSP bucket.
but it might come from a court somewhere else that isn't using all of theirs. That's part of what they do with their, so every year at the end of July, we have any reallocation requests that we're going to ask for are due. After that, we can't ask for any more. So they do kind of a rebalancing at that point, and they'll take some back from courts that aren't using it all and redistribute it to courts that are using some.
Good thing. Thank you.
Yes.
Just for clarification, is it in the township, Charter Township of Ypsilanti? Is that the name, the grant? Like
Is it in the?
Charter, I think we have to sign it. I'm not sure.
You do, yes.
Okay,
And
this one.
I believe that it is, and I'm afraid I don't have a
Okay.
copy of the contract in front of me.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just want to
Yes.
make sure for that clarification. So we have a motion and support. Any other questions or comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion approved.
Okay.
Thank you, Magistrate.
Thank you very much.
Number 3 is a request to approve the Premier Safety to supply and install safety systems at the hydro station and compost facility in the amount of $38,925.72.
So move.
Support? Oh, go ahead, Stan.
We have a motion by Rose, support by Peterson. I have some questions.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. The request in front of you is to comply with MIOSHA's Part 2 fall protection for employees who are working in elevated or moving to elevated work platforms. For the hydro station, it's a fixed ladder that goes from the main floor that would go and transfers up to the overhead crane and access the roof. So that would be compliant in case they were to slip. They would be the harness would catch them so they wouldn't fall and get hurt. And at the compost facility during the winter months when they bring in the equipment and it's too tall for the building to put up their safety rails. So this system that we'll be using at the compost site would allow them to transfer the equipment and not run the risk of falling without that safety protection in place.
Questions or comments? Trustee Newman?
Yes, the picture that's stated there, that's the, not wrong way, but that's the original way before any adjustments are made, or is that the proposed picture?
That picture, there's an example of the modified way. So there's a cable system that runs in the middle of the fixed ladder from the top to the bottom, and there's a sliding hook that travels that cable, and if you fall, it would lock into place and stop you from falling. So you'd only fall and slip a couple inches.
So it hooks on the person?
Yeah, so it's got a connecting tether that would connect to the person. So as you slip, that would grab you.
Okay.
I just have one question. How do we know it's competitive since there's only one bid and it was after?
And that is true. I probably should have not used the word competitive because we did advertise on Mitten. We got no responses, which surprised me. It was downloaded 30 times about. We had 5 people or 5 companies come through and do walkthroughs with me, and none of them submitted. Later that afternoon, I did receive one from one of our vendors, Premier Safety, the one that you are considering tonight, and they just missed the deadline. So given the nature of the work and compliance with OSHA, I felt that we still should move forward with what I did receive. So.
Did they do the walkthrough?
They did. They did it back in January before we went out to advertisement, so I really can't say they did the walkthrough at the time of the advertisement, but they knew the facilities. So they took their original proposal and updated it for the current needs.
Madam Chair?
Yes. Trustee?
Is this only in one, and first of all, let me say, I'm supportive of employees being safe when they're working. But is this just one building that you need this harness and
2.
the other ladder?
Two facilities, compost
facilities.
and hydro.
Okay, so the total price is $38,000 something?
Yes.
What do you have? Do you have one there now?
We have,
that you use?
so we don't have any kind of fall protection in place at either location.
I mean, you have some kind of ladder system to get up there,
Correct.
but you don't have the protection.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. The original ladder from they put in the 1930s is still there and safe. It's just this part is being added to comply with the fall protection.
Thank you.
Yes, trustee Swanson?
So what kind of training happens, like, once it's installed? Because it's only going to be as good as people using it. And then what expectation is there that if you're on the ladder, you use the fall protection?
Yep. So there'll be annual training for the staff, for refresher training, and then any new hires coming into those departments would have to have dedicated training on that before they could use the systems. So that would fall under the general safety program that we have under training that I usually will provide. Similar with lockout, tagout, confined space, overhead crane, forklifts, et cetera.
Madam Chair.
Yes, trustee Newman?
So am I to understand that all exhaustive requests for bid have been exhausted?
Yes.
Through Mitten?
We use Mitten, and we got some downloaded, some interest, but nothing came back on the deadline. So we had no one there to open, and nothing there to open that day, which was disappointing.
So we don't know if this is over or under the price, fair market value.
I don't. I mean, I got some initial costs back in January, and as I went through the financial policy, it required to go out to bid. So by the time I got it done and price has gone up. So this is what we got back.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to just reemphasize that Mike shared that there were 5 companies that attended the walkthrough, and usually that's like a good indication of if people were going to bid on it. You know, if 30 people downloaded it, 25 of them said, meh, I'm okay. But we were surprised, I think, to not have at least, I don't know, 3 or 5
I was
bids.
hoping for at least 2.
But yes, we did post it. There were people that looked at it who were qualified. 5 people attended the walkthrough. Unfortunately, no one submitted anything to be opened.
Yes, trustee Peterson?
But I think we had a bid out there for the appropriate time for quite a while.
It was 30 days.
Yeah, 30 days. Longer than that, yeah.
Usually we do them at least for the 2 weeks.
Right. It was out there 30
yeah.
days. Now tell me again, how did the company reach you? Or the department? The one bid?
So that was a company that we have services now. They do some of our confined space monitoring service. The fire department uses them for some of their safety stuff. So it's a known company that we have, that we use periodically. So they just recently serviced our AEDs, so that we have here at the township. So.
And Giovanna, our county director, has approved where the funds are coming from?
Yeah, we talked about that. We didn't see an issue, but before anything is issued, we'll finalize that. If there's any issue with something in like that we don't know now, I'll come back before it's executed. We should be fine. We've used those appropriation numbers for other safety projects.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? And there's no agreement or anything, it's just purchasing?
So this is
Installation of?
Yeah, an installation, that's correct. Before they can proceed, they'll have to supply other insurances to the guidelines that we have, so. Which they have already been told that they'll take care of that as soon as I.
They're MIOSHA
Oh, yeah.
certified companies?
Yeah. Yep, they're in Sterling Heights. Yep.
One more thing, Madam Chair. Just want to ask Mike, when you do the bid and the attorney has to look at the contract, whatever, how long will it take to install it?
So it happens that this company is been awarded a job for the city of Ann Arbor on their water towers. So they should be starting their work here in the next couple weeks, and then we'll be on the tail end of that visit. So they'll have it probably done by middle of November.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comment? We have a motion support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 3 is a request to approve, number 4 is a request to receive authorization for circuit court litigation to abate a public nuisance if necessary at a property identified as 7416 Maple Lawn.
So move.
Motion Rowe,
Support.
support Eldridge.
Good evening, Board. Belinda Kingsley, Community Compliance Director. I'm here to request approval to bring forward litigation on this property to mitigate public nuisance. And 7416 Maple Lawn is located in a R3 zone in the Greenfields subdivision. The property is titled in the name of Terrace Rice. And Ms. Rice had purchased the house and lived there for a while. It's in foreclosure. She is, that's what she had told our ordinance officer who was investigating a complaint. The mortgage is held by USDA Rural Development, and this information will be confirmed and adjusted if necessary after a title search. But that's the information that we've been provided. The initial complaint on this came in March of '23, and it was for branches on the ground following a storm, a brush pile in the backyard. A notice of the violation was issued to the property owner at that time and the mortgage company. And that was when we were told that it was in foreclosure and she was going to be moving out of the house. The township's mowing contractor did mow the property several times in 2023 and cleaned up the tree debris. In April of '24, another complaint was received regarding the house being vacant at that point, an unsecured garage door, and again, the tall grass was back. A request was sent to the registered owner who had at that point moved out but was still in the township. She did not take any action. The grass was cut several times again by our contractor. The property was posted with a property preservation contractor's information, and although we have tried to contact them numerous times, most recently just before I took this action, no calls have been returned to us. And they did start mowing the grass, so we are happy for that. But an administrative search warrant was prepared and executed October 2nd this year, and Officer Bob Kelch went into the house interior and discovered that the interior is unsanitary with food and household belongings and just a mess, and there's evidence of rodent infestation in the house, which can be expected with food being left behind. And the officers did talk to the neighbors. They aren't having any issues with rodents at this point coming to their house, but it's just a matter of time based on the conditions inside the house. And one neighbor did inform our officer that somebody we assume was from the property preservation company recently did an inspection on the house and chose not to enter because they could see through the windows the unsanitary conditions in the interior and didn't want to go inside. So at this point, we're requesting approval to have our attorneys bring forward litigation in circuit court to address the unsanitary conditions on the inside of the property, which will require a court order. And also, once that's addressed, we would have Orkin, our contractor, investigate what needs to be done to bring that into compliance.
Questions or comment?
Was someone living there?
Yes, until sometime between the summer of '23 and the summer of '24, she had moved out.
Okay.
But she had said when this was first being investigated that she was going to be moving out and it was going into foreclosure.
I wish there was something we could do with these mortgage companies and loan companies who abandon these properties because there's a long period of time to go through the different steps of foreclosure, but they do nothing to maintain them.
They did, the posting that they have on the property states that they are aware that the property is vacant, which they can accelerate their foreclosure process when the property has been abandoned and vacant. And it's, if they would contact us or answer when we call, we'd find out why they aren't doing this, they just, which is the reason, we've reached a dead end, and we're asking for assistance from our legal counsel to resolve this, but they can expedite their foreclosure process if they choose to, and they've acknowledged that it is abandoned and vacant.
So we have a motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 5 is request to receive authorization for circuit court litigation to abate a public nuisance at a property identified as 406 Green Lawn Street.
So moved, Peterson.
Motion Peterson, support Rowe.
406 Green Lawn Street is owned by a resident property owner named Rodney Haywood, who purchased the property in 2018. The history of violations on the property is extensive, pretty much dating back to 2018, 2019, and includes a variety of different violations, storing commercial vehicles, issues with the house under the property maintenance code, rodent harborage, blight, vehicles that are parked blocking the sidewalk, vehicles parked in the yard. Historically, once the property owner has been advised that there's a violation, he would resolve it, but it would eventually return to the violation conditions. In April of '24, we received a complaint that the resident was repairing vehicles that were not his in an open garage, carport, and in the yard. Citations were issued. He resolved it, and the citations were dismissed. In June, however, the situation intensified, and there were 2 large U-Haul type box trucks that were stored at the property, blocking the sidewalk. Multiple vehicles in inoperable state of repair being openly worked on late in the yard. Notice of violation was served in June and ignored by the property owner. A citation was issued, and with the intention of removing the 2 commercial vehicles that were blocking the sidewalk and the main source of complaint from the neighbors. That did not occur, and request for a public hearing, a formal hearing was held in 14B District Court, and a default judgment was entered when the property owner did not appear. That was on August 7th. And still, vehicles are parked in the street. We did remove the 2 commercial vehicles that were parked blocking the sidewalk, but we are still dealing with issues with vehicles in the street, the yard, the carport, and in the garage, and openly being worked on as an auto repair business. The property owner has not made an effort to maintain the property in compliance, and the situation from our standpoint has intensified enough that we would like to take this to circuit court and potentially obtain a permanent order that would allow us to clean up the property and to continue to maintain it if the property owner does not.
Questions or comment? I just know that these come to us from the residents that live near the properties, and our goal is compliance.
Yes.
We try to get people to comply without court action.
Absolutely.
And this is if it's necessary, and we've been successful that once you authorize court action, then the attorney, they can work out and make sure they take care of keeping the property clean and enter an order that we don't have to keep going back and writing citations to court, because we'll have a court order. But all of these are resident-driven.
Yeah, and we get a lot of complaints from neighbors, and we do the best we can, between building, planning, and ordinance to resolve everything that we can before we bring it. I know it seems like I'm here a lot lately, but, you know, we've reached a point where we're just not going to get anywhere, or we have no one to get anywhere with, like the house that's in foreclosure. And we do have with our relationship with our legal counsel, we are able to bring these forward and get resolution a lot quicker.
There's a motion support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 6 is a request to renew the Comcast ENS agreement along with additional sites as outlined.
So moved, Peterson.
Motion Peterson, support Hunter. Hello, Travis.
Madam Supervisor, members of the board, so this project is two major components. One is to renew our existing private network that we have through Comcast and bring on the West Willow Resource Center into our network. The current agreement expires in December of this year, so we just want to, it's been great service, so we want to renew that. The second component of this project is to bring all the public surveillance cameras that we have throughout the township into our private network. Currently, these cameras are connected to the public internet. We want to bring them into a private network where they will be better secured and more reliable.
And this will be, if it's all right, contingent upon attorney approval, of course. Is that acceptable to the motioner, Peterson?
Yes, ma'am.
Hunter, is it? Okay. Okay, any questions or comments regarding this request? Trustee Swanson?
So we already have a Comcast service with the community center, with the West Willow Community Center, the Resource Center?
Not with West Willow as of yet. Our goal is
This
to
is
bring that
adding it
on.
here.
Yeah, we want to add that site.
So there are policies that guide the usage of internet. If you're in the community center or you're here, will there be a policy that guides usage when someone is using internet service at
The guest internet services at West Willow will be the exact same system that is at the Civic Center and all in the community center and all of our sites. So they will be exactly the same. They're as filtered. We try to protect both our visitors and our network by filtering out inappropriate content.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 7 is a request to renew the primary internet service with Advanced Communication and Data AS 5 BPS for a 96-month term.
So move.
Motion Rowe,
Support.
support Eldridge.
Madam Supervisor, members of the board, so this is a renewal of our existing internet service provider. We are increasing our available bandwidth and reducing our cost for said service.
Questions or comments? And this is $1,350 a month, is that correct?
No, it would be the $679. Currently, we pay, or no.
That's 1 gig.
$679, yeah. Currently, we pay $691. We're going to go to the $679 per month.
Which is a few pages lower. 678.95.
Questions or comment? Gigabytes per second. Okay.
Is this because of what? Why the price reduction? Even though it's minimal,
So the initial agreement expires in January of the current agreement expires in January of 2025, and that was a 5-year agreement. So 5 years ago, ACD had to build the network. So they had to install fiber optic cables from the road into the building. So that cost was included in the first year pricing. So they don't have that cost anymore. They can pass that savings on to us.
Does this need attorney review as well? That was a question. Has the attorney reviewed it?
The information was sent over to Legal Services on last Friday, so I'm not sure if he's had a chance to get to it yet.
I would guess the answer would be no if it was just Friday. So
Not
again,
a lot
could
of
this
time.
be contingent upon attorney review?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a motion and support to approve it, contingent upon attorney review. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Request to waive the financial policy and purchase a screen core revac 2 material separator from Maverick Environmental Equipment in the amount of $88,500, which is budgeted in the 2024 budget.
So move.
Motion Rowe,
Support.
support Eldridge. Mr. Rousey?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good evening.
My name's Carl Rousey. I'm the compost facility manager for the Charter Township of Ypsilanti. I'm here this evening to get permission and request the board to purchase this screen cord wind sifter. What this machine does is when we do our screening at our compost site, plastics are put into the yard waste stream. This gets into our screener. This discharges into our spoils pile, which is the non-desirables, if you will, and then it gets airborne, or I cannot reincorporate this into our feedstock. The goal is to divert this from the landfill, the good material, and divert the plastics to the landfill. Basically, this machine is a big vacuum cleaner. There's going to be 2 suction heads on it. These suction heads work in tandem. Midway through the discharge side of the trommel screener, which is a screener that you put material in, it rotates. Good material falls through the screens. The bad material goes out the discharge conveyor. There'll be a vacuum head on the midpoint of this conveyor and on the discharge, the very end of this conveyor. And it should, as you can tell with the picture, that's very similar how our machine is set up. And it basically lifts the plastic, glass particles, heavy plastics, does not take care of any kind of metals, which usually our grinder takes care of that. But it'll put it into a container, and then we can dispose of that, and then I can turn around and take the material that I do see fit for recomposting and put it back into our feedstock, which is our existing windrows. It's a standalone unit, self-powered.
Portable.
Yes, and it is portable with the use of a trailer, which I think Supervisor Stumbo, I've discussed this with you, with maybe some overstock that we have around here. I can make that a mobile unit, which ultimately, when we discharge this material, it does get airborne. And part of my description is that we would be able to go around our site and be able to vacuum up, if you will, the loose plastic that does get airborne. Unfortunately, it gets in our feedstock. We can't control what comes into the site. I just got to control what's there now, and I do want to remove that plastic. And we make a great product, and so far we've been doing very well. This is relatively new to the composting industry. They do offer a single suction head. The dual suction has not quite been modified enough, but Maverick Equipment does have a unit that's based out of Ireland that offers what I wanted. Just if you can get 80% of your plastics out of that feedstock, and I can reincorporate it into my existing windrows, it's a win-win for us at the compost site. This setup right here is usually used in your material MRF centers where recyclables go into. It's kind of the premises behind it. It lifts up small plastics when you take your recyclables back, like our recyclables leave our site. They use wind, they use air, magnetic heads. That was the premise behind this machine. They thought, well, let's take it out to the field. There's only been a couple producers of this machine, but the dual suction, only one was offering at this time. I'm sure down the road a ways there's going to be others jumping on board, but as of right now, Maverick Equipment out of Alma, Michigan offers that piece of equipment.
Questions or comments?
Yes.
Trustee Newman?
Two questions. I assume the financial policy is regarded to a certain limit for the equipment. Is this equipment, has this equipment been compared to another piece of equipment? In other words, was there a bid out for other makers of this equipment?
So I verbally contacted DNL Equipment, and the problem is they gave me a stern no. Vermeer Equipment, they don't offer that kind of setup. Again, this is relatively new. Ann Arbor went through a different system. I reached out to a couple compost sites, so I wasn't playing like I knew this really well, because this is new, and reached out to a couple fellow composters. They have a conveyor unit that really wouldn't fit our system out there. DNL Equipment out of Jackson offered something similar to that, but it was a single suction. As I went out on the internet and looked around, I could not find anybody that offered the dual suction. It's just unique, and I wanted it to be unique, and I think that's going to serve us to get me to that 80-85 percentile of reduction of spoils going into our feedstock.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to, John, it's really we're not really waiving the financial policy. There's no need to waive the financial policy because you've identified all the reasons that this is a single source item. But I think Carl you wanted to be like overly cautious.
Exactly, I want to be cautious because there are individuals that do offer a single suction, and that's not what I bid for. I wanted the dual suction, which in one of those photos, you'll see the single and the dual.
Yeah, and you explained that in your memo too. You said that it's, this company is a single source for this particular product.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I do, Madam
Peterson?
Chair. Carl, in the past, what have you used? If you haven't had a system like that, you manually take the plastic out?
Unfortunately, yes and no. The bigger pieces, we were able to, as we screen, get out and do a walk around, and we would physically take those out, put them into old yard waste bags. We don't want to use plastic bags, so we were using yard waste bags that our residents drop off at our compost site, and we would stockpile 15 or 20 of those. So during a normal screening, the operator, we always do walk-arounds around our machines. So we would get out while the machine's doing its job, and we would physically pick up this plastic. It's time-consuming. It just wasn't a good way of doing it. So, and a lot of stuff would go to the landfill, and I'm trying to reduce the landfill charges. Every year we're putting about $10,000 worth of material into the landfill through trucking and disposal.
I could see it being time-consuming. Another piece I had read, on a yearly base, we will be saving $10,000 because eventually you take that to the land post.
There's still going to be a landfill charge, you are correct, but I'm going to reduce that $10,000.
By how much, you think?
It's going to be such a new machine, but if I were to be put on the spot right now, well over half.
Okay, so it would actually break it down a little bit smaller where it wouldn't cost as much, or not as much plastic?
Exactly. Plastic is very light.
Right,
the material that we're sending to the landfill.
Less material by using this machine.
Absolutely.
And less cost.
We're charged by a tonnage at the landfill. If I can reduce that tonnage into plastic, which is relatively very light, and we will dispose of it at our site. So we have 40-yard dumpsters at our site. So we'll be able to put them in our own dumpsters. I cut out the trucking, and we just dispose of it on site. So.
And one more question. They give you some kind of warranty?
Yes.
How many years with this?
We got a 1 year.
last?
We got a 1 year on the machine chassis itself. So the exterior body, the components and whatnot, you got a 1 year. The 2-year Yanmar engine, it's a diesel engine. You got a 2-year warranty on that. So that's upon delivery. So that warranty kicks in as soon as you get the machine. So we have a 2-year on the diesel engine that's powering the equipment, and 1 year on basically.
Just on that contract, but can you renew that or extend that?
There could be a possibility.
So we can have it for 10 years or so?
There is a renewal that we could get.
At a reasonable price?
Yes, and we
After 2
probably
years.
could. And that could be renewed before the warranty wears out. So I have that option. If I was assured by the contractor in Maverick that they have these in the field, the single suction, and they have yet to have any problems. The Yanmar engine is a very strong engine, and it's a very, very simple machine. Very simple machine. It looks intense, but it's very simple. Not a lot of electronics, more mechanical parts. So it's a very good machine.
I only ask because you guys get so much stuff out there. It's used quite a bit, okay? So my thing, if it's the motor and the parts, it's only 2 years, wouldn't it be sensible to try to put some language in there that we get a good deal on? If it breaks down, it's $80,000, and you deserve it. You
Sure,
know?
sure,
But if
absolutely.
you're out there doing it by hand, oh my God.
Right,
So
right.
if there's to be something,
And I know that they said
Just
they
in
could.
case.
I could, and I can budget for that in my next
I mean,
year's
just get a
budget.
budget price of if after 2 years, you can't get the parts for the machine, you can't do this, it's no good at that point. So maybe just inquire if could some language maybe be submitted to the attorney review.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Other questions or comments? Trustee Swanson?
What kind of plastic is getting in it?
Mulch bags are our number one contaminant. People get done mulching their yards. They think that the mulch bags are decomposable, so they put them in their yard waste bags. Drink cups,
Okay.
planting pots, planting cells, cell packs. Those
So
are our
they're
primary.
putting them in the brown bags?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Yes, they
yard
put them in
waste.
there, and unfortunately, you just can't see them.
Right.
I mean, when waste management picks them up curbside, we can catch it with our gate
Right.
attendant. They'll check the bags and do random checks. But unfortunately, when they're picking up on the routes, people are stuffing them in there, and they bring them to our site. We catch them when we're pushing up the material. We catch them when we grind, because that material does explode then, and so we have to manually go out and pick up the
Right.
big ones. But this machine will reduce that part of it down to almost 85%.
So is there
So-
something we could do, like when we do our little booklet that goes out to everybody and that says, maybe it's already in there, I don't know, that just did a little more education stuff to just say, look, I know people think, you can throw any plastic or anything like that, but maybe something that would just say, sometimes something that says don't put plastic in it might be enough to get a few people not to put plastic in it. The machine's needed, no doubt.
Right.
But something that just lets people or makes people more aware that
Absolutely.
don't put plastics, and I mean, it seems like people should know that, but I don't know when we do our next brochure, if we could add that to the compost
December,
page.
yeah, we do it in
Sure, we got
December.
time for that.
Yeah, I remember people were putting plastic bags in the recycling,
Yes.
and that's a
Yes.
no-no because the conveyor, it was messing up the conveyor belt in the recycling centers, and they were manually taking them out, and
It's labor intensive.
we would get charged if a load was contaminated with those plastic bags. So that took a lot of education too, and people just think they can recycle because they just do. And sometimes they put a recycle emblem on stuff and it's really not recyclable.
That's true.
They say things are biodegradable. Well, maybe 100 years it takes to biodegrade, but
That's right.
so there's a lot of misinformation out on products as well, too. So we do want to educate. And when I want to just, Carl, you really thought about this and you put it in your budget for this year. And I know it's been on your mind. And the compost site, and our compost site ran by you and Brandon and the staff that works at gate, people rave about it. And Eagle comes out and inspects it, and you're just such a good caretaker of the
Thank you.
compost site and our residents too. And I appreciate you bringing this forward, but what I appreciate more than anything is that you really thought about it, wanted it, and budgeted for it.
Yes, thank you.
Now, having just a single source, I don't think that's anything we could have predicted, but I bet if we get it, there will be more compost sites going to that.
I believe there will be.
Yeah.
And thank you. And just a little tidbit, today was our annual inspection at the compost site.
Oh, okay.
So we can continue doing business another year. We passed, so we
Thank
just had
you.
our eco come down today, so it was a busy day.
Good,
So,
good, all right.
One more quick thing. Just
Newman?
quantifiable, how much time will it save? And just,
I don't know if I've ever put an hour,
yeah.
trust I don't know if we ever put an hour. We did it at our convenience, depending on how the material goes through our screener. If it's
Okay.
dry and at a 40% moisture rate, You
Yeah.
can't keep up with the material, but when it starts getting wet, we slow the machine down. There's no sense sitting in a loader, so we get out, stretch our legs, do a walk-around machine, and we start picking plastic. I could not give you that honestly, because this will eliminate that
Okay.
aspect of it. And it's a lot safer, too, to not be around that discharge conveyor
Yeah.
when stuff is coming off the backside. But it will definitely aid on our finished product and the feedstock going back into our windrows.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 9 is a request to set the public hearing for the 2025 fiscal year budget for November 19th, 2024 at 6 p.m.
So moved.
Motion Rowe, support Swanson. We have to have a public hearing in order to present the budget. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 10 is a request authorization to move forward with the detection system and engineering company, which is DSE, to be the primary camera operations vendor for maintenance with Ypsilanti Township.
So moved.
Motion Rowe,
Support Peterson.
support Peterson. Mr. Hines and
Good
Travis?
evening.
Good evening.
John Hines, Municipal Service Director, here with Travis McDougald, IS Manager. And we're bringing back forward the request to move forward with Detection Systems and Engineering Company, DSE, to be the primary camera operations vendor with Ypsilanti Township. Due to an internal review earlier this year with residential services, department staff, recreation staff, and then IT staff, kind of the primary 3 departments that work with the camera operations, we just noticed some deficiencies with the operations, and we put an RFQ on Mitten from June 18th to July 3rd. Submissions were submitted to Mr. McDougald, and we received submissions from 5 companies: Conti, DA Central, DSE Security Designs, and Security 101. After the response were submitted, the review team chose to interview DSE, DA Central, and Security 101. Through that process, we were most comfortable with DSE due to their knowledge and familiarity with our current operating system, pricing, and experience with other government organizations. DSE does have the infrastructure to be an integral part in the communication with DT and Comcast as well. And we think with that relationship, they could help streamline the process to get cameras serviced and installed in the township.
Is there questions or comments? Trustee Swanson?
So this is the same item that was brought before where we won't have a discontinuation of services or there'll be an overlap? Am I right about this, or is this a different change
Correct.
in cameras?
It is the same item that was tabled 2 meetings ago.
Okay.
Madam, can I just clarify, Debbie? The request changed a little bit. Last time, if you remember, we were agreeing to approve a contract, and this time we're accepting them as our preferred service provider.
Okay.
So the actual agenda request is a smidge different.
And is it still the case that we will not have an interruption in the services because we're switching providers?
That's correct. There's anticipation no service stoppages that should happen with the change to DSE from Conti.
And this will happen after the election? Will be with, because we were wanting to be careful about any change in a provider before elections, just so that it can be secure. That was discussed at the last meeting. Are we switching like before the election?
The goal would be to switch before the election.
Madam, and just, John, if you could just discuss the service, this is going to be someone that provides as like our provider to service the cameras, but the actual cameras that are up and running right now will not change or be moved. They will not be discontinued and replaced with a different
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to
Which
that.
I think last time wasn't clear either.
Okay.
Like last time I was envisioning all new cameras being, remounted and all that. And these are the same cameras. This is just going to be a different provider that oversees and services them.
Yeah, so their primary role is going to be the installation of new cameras and any repairs needed for the physical cameras themselves. Our service with Comcast per the board's decision earlier, will remain unchanged. Our service with DT remain unchanged. It's just going to be with the actual physical cameras themselves.
So the service provider that we get our feed from is not changing? Am I hearing that right now? I guess my concern is that it will be too late if we don't have the video footage needed at a time period when we must have it.
Yeah, it won't interrupt that at all. What we currently have is if we want to have additional cameras, Conti is our sole camera provider, and they do the preventative maintenance and maintenance checks on it. Currently, we pay a yearly amount of $24,000, and the new proposal is to do it like we do our HVAC system, is that we pay on time and material versus a $24,000 annual contract, and they only check them once a quarter unless we find an issue, and then we report to them and they'll come out and repair it. So it's just, it won't interrupt anything. The cameras are the same, Comcast is the same. The only thing is different is the people who repair it will be a new provider.
Does our current provider know we're not going to be with them?
Well, they bid on it.
Yes, our current provider did provide a bid for the services.
So they haven't been notified they won't be the accepted bid, or they would know now they're not the accepted bid?
They would know now, and a notice would be sent after it was approved.
Okay. And no concerns that there would be any kind of sabotage or anything with that, with our cameras the way they are?
No, I don't. Because
We've tried this-
Comcast is the video feed to it.
So they shouldn't be around our cameras at all anymore once we're saying we're going with a different provider. 'Cause
That's correct.
It's our
And-
camera, we own the camera. Comcast provides the internet connection.
A Vigilon is the software that the cameras run on, and all the bidding camera providers also work with the Vigilon, so they are very well equipped to make the transition as seamless as possible.
So the old, like what we did last month, we're not, like, that's been rescinded and this is replacing it, what we're doing today, right now.
Yeah, two things is that I wanted to just share, Debbie, because I don't know that it's clear, and like, anyways, we have Robin Castleheim actually like has access to that camera system and checks them daily. So we won't ever we're not losing access to our ability to see them, verify them, make sure they're all good. And then it is different than last time. Last time we were going to approve a 5-year contract with them. And so this is not doing that. It is selecting them as our like preferred provider, service provider, but it's not signing a 5-year contract.
And was there a need for legal review? Because last time there was going to need to be legal review. Even if we're going to use them as a service provider, there's got to be some agreement that we have with them. Yes or no?
Yes, and Travis and I did speak to Doug earlier this week, and before anything is signed, he will make sure, we will make sure to get it in front of him.
So this is going to have the same condition as the other things that we've passed tonight, pending legal review? Yes or no?
I'm not sure, because this was for time and material. This is a little bit different. We could,
Yeah, we're not doing a preventative maintenance plan with DSE like we had with Conti, and that'll actually be a benefit because it'll save the township money as well as the residents' money who get charged as part of the special assessment. And we just found that the time and material the DSE is charging, there is an on-site cost, and there's a separate, actually cheaper remote cost. And for the service they can provide, a lot of the work can be done remotely. It's only when, there's something physically wrong with the cameras that we internally, either through Robin, Travis, or myself, would notice that there's an error, or they would notice on their end. And a lot of the time when that error happens, it's sometimes a DTE power issue or the Comcast cable issue. So that was one thing that kind of made them as a very attractive partner, is the fact that the time and material is separate like that, and they can also look remotely.
Madam Chair.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I just don't think it wouldn't hurt to have legal review, because it's an agreement to time and material. It's not the same, it's a professional service more than it is a contract for actual services. But it wouldn't hurt to have our attorney review it, to make sure it's clear. Yes, Trustee Peterson?
Yes, John, I think last time you said that this was just a person that's coming into service. Is that correct? Like the old company to service, if the cameras went out, they come out and service it, right?
Correct.
And
How it
I
was set
think
up
you made
before.
the statement that when you had those problems, they wouldn't come. They delayed coming, and that's why you wanted to kind of change over to another company?
As part of the review, it just seemed that the timeline was not as quick as I think the township was looking for,
You
especially when
couldn't
it comes
get
to
them out there to service you
yeah, and the installation of
in a
new
rapid
cameras.
time.
One thing that DSC said in the interview, in both interviews that we did with them, was that their response time was within 2 days. They do work weekends and holidays. They'll also send an alert to, most likely, Robin when they're on site, and send a PDF report of the site visit when they're done. And that was, again, one thing that really excited us about their company. And they're also working on, they had not finished at the time of the interview, a portal process, which, again, when that gets up and going, we'll be able to track all of our open and closed service tickets.
Okay, thank you. I have a question.
Trustee Newman?
So the dispatch charges, is that when they have to come out and make a repair? There's remote on-site dispatch when it talks about rate for services provided by the bidders?
That's correct. That is a charge per when they actually have to come out to visit the site.
So in looking at Security 101, it's $65 in comparison to $145 for DSE. What accounts for that difference in the dispatch charges?
Do you remember what the?
It's whatever they want to set.
Yeah.
Security 101 says that the rate depends on the type of work. Is that why?
No, it's just, I
variable?
just was trying to, because Travis in the interviews as well, but it's just what they want to set. And really, when we went forward with DSE, of course, the price that they charge made a big factor, but it was the overall encompassing how they integrate into our current system and our current relationship with Comcast and DTE and the service that they provide, and they were just the most comprehensive.
So we already do business with DSE, is that correct? Or you're familiar with DSE and what they do?
We do not work with DSE currently. This was the first, at least myself, that I learned about their company. But the more I learned about their company, the more that, I really was excited to learn more about them, because again, we are here for the camera services, but there's more that they offer within our current system and their current security system that I believe we'll be able to discuss in the future for the board's consideration. And that does come with the key card access to the building, which will need to be integrated into new buildings, as well as looking at the existing, especially with the upcoming project that's going to go on. So DSE, with how their system worked to integrate the cameras and the key cards, there is a future down that road that I think would integrate those two systems very well.
So Security 101 didn't do all of those things, or when you had a chance to go with that, or investigate them as well, or?
Okay, they did not support System Galaxy, which is currently what we utilize for our key card access and the door locks to all the buildings.
Okay.
It also says that the rate depends on the type of work. So that's a variable rate?
It is, instead of the flat rate. Sorry.
Depending on the skill set of the technician.
No.
I know that Treasurer Eldridge has been very involved extensively with the current provider and the overall camera security systems in the township, and he highly recommends.
I didn't sit in on these interviews, wasn't a part of that process, but I would say that the current provider, there's a lengthy history of problems that no matter how we've tried to resolve them over the last couple of years, it's just not worked. And so I briefly have talked with Travis and John as they went through this process. And I see the price differential. I'm comfortable with it. I looked at some of the notes they did, and I think that the group that they're recommending is the correct one.
I guess I appreciate the work that's been done on behalf of this. I can understand that if the current one isn't working well, that these are systems that we have to have in place. I guess my concern is that just going based on what people tell us isn't necessarily, like, we have some lessons learned now. I would think lessons learned would be something that we'd put in something that says to people, this is what we're looking for, that's a little more formal, that our legal counsel could look at. I'm not trying to delay something, but as clear as we possibly can be on what we need seems to be a prudent move on our part.
Yeah, and just to add, what we included in the RFQ was as cut and dry as we could make it on the services that we do need for the township. And when we interviewed all of the companies, without going into, I would say, specifics that we should not in terms of our current deficiencies, what type of reaction time we are looking for, what type of service time, and the kind of obstacles we've seen, how they would meet those obstacles and what they would do to overcome those was a focal point in all the interviews. And, there was one, where DSE specifically has their own bucket truck in case that's been a barrier before of getting that on site. They have one that's no problem. And again, their mobilization time really was the fastest of any company.
Well, and it could be I'm just missing something. I know that when we do an RFP, that we're looking for someone to provide a service, and they're going to give us a quote, but there has to be something, usually you bring things back to us that says this is what we're going to get, or it's a little more in stone than just what they put in as an RFP, unless I'm missing something.
That I would just say that this is more for like their professional services. So it's harder to quantify that, whereas like we're not, picking out a specific item that we're purchasing. So I think that's why it looks and feels a little bit different, because we're choosing to trust their service the same way we would with like OHM or Spicer to be our, professional provider for that particular thing, rather than, a 14B court revision with all of these different particular items that can be seen and graphed out on a nice Excel sheet.
And if I can say something to add on to that, Heather, Trustee Swanson. So I did include in the last paragraph, as Supervisor Stumbo alluded to, our current maintenance agreement with our current vendor is $24,000 per year. So it's basically $6,000 per quarter for all of the external, which is non-building cameras, to be looked at, addressed, and that does not include the time and materials on top of that for any type of service. So with our current agreement, we are taking out that quantifiable preventative maintenance plan, because we have found that though preventive maintenance is a very comforting word to hear, our cameras really don't need a camera service as often as we were paying for, where this should be overall much more expensive, because their proposal as well for the next contract was actually $31,000 a year. So for us to meet that number in time and materials with DSC, it would take over 300 service hours. And a lot of the issues that we come to see with our cameras is going to be on a Comcast reboot of the modem or some physical things, but it's not going to be on their physical staff hours on site. Is
there an estimate of what the cost would be with DSE? I mean, we have the 24,000 that apparently is made up of things that we won't need. Is there an estimate of what we will need or with DSE? Say, for instance, if you estimate we'll spend 20,000 as opposed to 24, based on their different rates and charges.
The biggest cost we'll have is just the year one when it's getting them onto our system and working with the Comcast integrations, if I'm saying that correctly, Travis, with the new ENS servers that he brought forward before. After that, it really is going to be on an as needed, and I could wager kind of an estimate on what I think it could be, but I just know it's not going to be near the $24,000 unless, on the current camera system we have right now, unless a lot were to go wrong. Again, that's over 300 service hours. We would bring forward, as we've done with our current vendor, any new cameras that need to be installed, and that is going to be on the camera price and then the time and materials to install it. But that's kind of a separate price outside comparing it to our current contract, because that's also what we pay to our current vendor.
So would this be in the contract that's going to be reviewed by the lawyer or agreement or, okay, so,
Yeah, letter of agreement of some sort. Yeah.
okay, all right.
All right, so we have a motion and support to approve this contingent upon attorney review. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 11 is budget amendment number 13. Clerk Rowe?
I have a motion to amend the 2024 budget. I would move to increase the recreation fund budget by $2,809 to $935,059 and approve the line item changes as outlined. And move to increase the 14B District Court Fund budget by $26,408 to $1,832,344 and approve the line item changes as outlined. So move the budget amendment.
We have a motion by Rowe, supported by Eldridge. Discussion? One of these items is to increase contributions and donations for the funds for special events. And I just, although she's not here, I'd want to recognize Robin Castle-Hines for, she's really putting on new events in the township and asking for donations and getting them from the community, from different businesses. But the Dash Divot was 2 weeks ago, and then they had a, what do you call the food? Truck war. And this past Saturday was the fall craft show. And like the Rosie show, it started out slower, but the quality of the crafters was excellent. And it was so well organized. All the events that Robin has put forth has been very well organized and executed, and I just want to say that, even because it's part of this budget amendment. So. We have a motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. There's no other business. Public comments? Are there any public comments? You go to the microphone and give your name if you're comfortable.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Board. My name is Myla Harris, and I have been a township employee for over 30 years, and I work in the accounting department. And I just rose to make a comment to the board. Let me get I won't be before you long. And I'm truly hoping that the township treasurer is listening, since my request to have a conference with him was denied by him several times. I want the board to know that just because you are an elected official, you don't have the right to enter the accounting department rooms without permission or acknowledgement. In the accounting department, we have an obligation to the employees, the residents and our vendors to ensure that their personal information and identities are protected, and we take pride in doing just that. Especially since May of 2024, that obligation and security have been elevated in our department. I'm asking to please respect our employees' privacy and their rights when entering our department, because that is what we do as a department, and we stand by that. And I know that maybe being a former police officer is something that may be a confidence, but it means nothing here for the township. Additionally, in the accounting department, I am responsible for analyzing spending trends, identifying cost savings opportunities, and working closely with other departments to ensure efficient financial operations. The Treasurer's Office and the accounting department has always worked together to make constructive recommendations to ensure the best outcome for the township. The Deputy Treasurer approved her staff to accept a cashier check written for more than $550 more than the tax bill for that resident, and promised to issue a refund. As I mentioned to her, that is not in the best interest of the township because of the possibility of fraud. We are not a retail or a cash checking company. So please understand, and I do understand, that the treasurer has the right to manage his department, but he also has the right to mismanage his department as well. And in my opinion, the deputy treasurer wasn't offended by the idea of having to refrain from that particular check being accepted, but I believe she was frustrated with the treasurer because she was overwhelmed and unprepared because of the treasurer's extreme absenteeism from day one, his lack of support for her, and his lack of interest and availability to be trained. The residents deserve better. Madam Chair, I believe his full-time job as the Lawrence Tech University baseball coach versus his position as the elected official has taken precedence to where the residents have to fight for his attention, almost like a neglected pet whom he only comes home to let out once a week. Again, like I said, the residents deserve better. And I also remember how the treasurer complained publicly and made a big deal about the former township clerk's attendance, but ironically, he's doing the same. His extreme absenteeism should call for a vote of no confidence. Seems hypocritical to me. And in conclusion, there's no need to worry for the deputy treasurer, just in case, because no need to have protection from me, because the only monster is the treasurer in that department that's in the closet that she has to fear. Thank you.
Are there other public comments?
It's already green. Thank you. My name is Jeremy Haley. I'm a new township resident of 6 months. And just hearing what you guys said, we're talking about the sewer and stuff. Many years ago, I was a plant chemist on the west side of Ann Arbor. Had a company who actively evaded the tests that were done by the county and the state and all that. You might ask how? Well, they would call them up and say, hey, we're going to be out this such time. The employer would shut down all the machines, have the people stand by the machines, and run water through the machines. So the people seeing things would think things would be running normal. As they go to the output and go, hey, everybody's working, let's test it. All the tests would come out fine. A week after my daughter was born, I was fired because the whole time I was pushing more environmental controls on how to control the output of the waste into the system. Well, after that, I made a call to the authorities, and 6 months later, the plant was shut down. They were storing high volumes in 55-gallon drums of copper 2 sulfate. and other carcinogenic things that were going down the drain that most of you probably couldn't name. And you can put in all the laws, all the regulations, but you can't control that. Okay? How you can control it in a way is say, okay, we're going to be there to test for you, but it's going to be Monday through Friday, anytime between 9 and 5. So they can't set things up.
Okay.
Okay? So bigger operations are going to have a bigger, hard time to do that. But those are the ones that are going to have the more money to have the better controls of the pollution. The ones you want to look out for are the smaller ones. The smaller companies, they will do that to save that money.
Thank you.
Okay? And I don't know, you guys talk about, you call them Eagle, but I can't pronounce it because there's no A in there. Like
Right, Eagle, that is what they, yeah.
You guys might want to look into the 1,4-dioxin contamination that's in Ann Arbor.
Right, that Gelman saying.
That's Ms. Gelman. It is coming towards Spartan Pond where Ann Arbor gets their water. And if you ever, I've been out in that area many, many times over the many years. I've always just called it the Huron River because they just backed it up and just called it something else. But once it hits that river, where does it go from there? It'll come here. That river is part of this system.
Right.
Okay? And right now, I don't trust people in contaminations. After studying environmental chemistry and doing things like that, one case I can bring up is Centralia, Pennsylvania. Most people's never heard about it. It's the one coal mine fire that somebody decided to burn a whole bunch of trash by an open coal mine, and hence it caught the coal on fire, and it's still burning today. And man's effort to contain it, to investigate it, all they did was make it worse. Is they drilled more holes in the ground, allowing more air to get to the thing to cause it to keep going. And that's my concern is with how man controls things. I've been living or moved from Scioto Township to Dexter area to here, and I'm familiar with things, and I don't have enough time to tell you other things that I saw that went on in the area. But
Okay.
that's a big concern. So just for companies, just.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Thank you. Are there any other public comment? Hearing none, motion to adjourn?
So move.
Support, Peters.
There's a support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned at 7:53. Thank you.